So we're doing our best to get live on Facebook so that folks who are listening in the group will have a chance to benefit from this as well. In the meantime, I'm here to just get us started. This is our monthly, about once a month, Ask Me Anything segment. And we just kind of gather up all of the best questions that folks have asked or topics that they've raised for folks who are new to our Facebook group. Folks like Gretchen Peterson, Courtney Ferguson, Celeste Fox, Sarah Windler, Carol Curious, Nancy, Isamine, Rosinda, Megan, Grogowski, Way, Beverly, Rebecca, and Avery, and then so many more. And it's just been such a privilege to get to know you all, as some of you have been starting to participate. And we're going to just go ahead and get started with Gretchen's question, or her topic. And if you're tagged in this, it's because we're answering one of your questions and want to make sure that you know where to find this post so that you can be a part of it. So Gretchen says, I have a 5-year-old and my biggest parenting challenges are the mess and getting my child ready for school or other outings. And when all of this is happening, how do I emotionally regulate myself? Well, yeah, so good to so good to ask these questions. I'm so glad you're here and raising that. I know that other folks in this community definitely have 4 to 6-year-olds and are in a similar place. And what I can say is that the getting ready or the leaving routine is oftentimes the place where the most fights happen. And it sort of makes sense because it's the perfect recipe for conflicts. You have time pressure. There are like a list of things that need to get done. So there's a lot of dynamic of being told what to do and then resisting doing the thing. So there's power dynamics in play that come play. So I just want you to know, Gretchen, you're in really good hands. And or like really good company, I should say, here with your question. I know Lee just hopped on and she could probably relate, right? Lee, to like getting the kids to transition or get them out the door can be such a headache. So one of the things I can offer to you is that when you take the time to sit down and actually make a plan for what that routine is going to look like, it can make all the difference. And when you do that, a little pre-gaming with, other caregivers or with a coach or with, a peer about what that could look like, and then bring it to the kids, and your 5-year-old could absolutely participate in this and say like, well, what are the steps we need to do to be able to get ready or to be able to get out the door? And really, kind of inquire that and go down that line of inquiry with them and brainstorm. What comes next can be really exciting because the kids are starting to like get more invested in making a plan and setting a goal and working towards that goal together. You might even find yourself doing things like creating a chart. I'll show you one of my clients' favorites in a second here. I'll pull it up. And when you have a chance to chart it out together, it also helps with just having like a visual cue for what does it take to, what are the actual steps that it takes to get out the door successfully. The other thing a chart can do is it can help you so that instead of having to be a verbal cue over and over and over again, which naturally puts you into a power struggle, you can go look at the chart together and say, oh, what's next on the chart? And that way it just shifts the dynamic. So here's an example of a flip routine chart where you like create the one on the left is an example, and then the one on the right is one that my clients actually made with their 2 kids. And you can get the idea that when you flip it up, the visual goes away and it really helps so they can see what's left. And this is obviously has pictures, so it's age appropriate for 5 and under, so they can see it. But also kids over 5 enjoy having the pictures. And then if you look on the right-hand side and you look at the bottom right, you'll see that circle with a little squiggly thing in it. Guess what that one is? One of the kids said, well, I need to put poop in the potty. So they drew a toilet with a poop in it. So really, it can be whatever your kids come up with at first. And I really start there so that it's less about getting it perfect or getting it right. And it's more about them being a part of the process. That will really go a long way to shifting out of the power struggle dynamic and into something that's more collaborative, And like I like to say, you know, kids like to be empowered, but we also need to make sure that we are empowered. So it does sort of strike a balance between empowering them and also getting done what needs to get done on time, which is about the limits of the routine. So Gretchen, we'd love to hear how that goes. So maybe, you know, let us know what you think of this tip and pop it into the chat once you've had a listen. Lee is sharing that she uses charts for morning and night. Lee is a client of mine who's been in the Family Foundation's immersion program now for many, many months. Has been such a great student, and she has made those per my suggestion. And Lee, I'm curious, like, what's the best thing about using those charts for you and your boys, your 3 boys? And that can give some inspiration to Gretchen and everyone else who might be listening to this Ask Me Anything. Great. All right. So next question, how do I stay emotionally present and focused on the joys of parenting while managing the overwhelming tasks of single parenting or parenting after separation? So Courtney and Celeste, thank you for, you know, being like more specific with your question and letting us know, like, well, what about for me in my situation in particular, where I'm finding myself solo parenting or single parenting? Really good question. And I also want to say that the suggestions I'm making are also applicable to everybody, but particularly important to folks who are finding themselves on a solo or single parenting journey. So just to put that out there. Well, and this also goes to what Gretchen said about wanting to be able to stay emotionally regulated herself. I mean, we've heard so much about self-care, self-care, self-care. The problem with some of the messaging around parents need self-care, women need self-care, we all need self-care, you know, is that oftentimes the suggestions will require a lot of resources and a lot of time that busy parents, and especially busy parents of multiples or busy single or solo parents, like just maybe won't be able to make the time or dedicate the resources to. So what I like to bring in terms of emotional regulation are micro practices that you can use in the moment that take less than a minute or at most 5, that are free, that are something that you can practice before you're upset, while during the time you're upset, even during the time that your kid is upset, and it will be helpful for the whole emotional system of the family so that everybody can start to have better emotional regulation tools, etc. So 2 of my favorites I'll give to you, but we also have a really great 6-part series on this that we run twice a year. So you might want to save the date for June 3rd through the 7th. Will be is it through the 7th? No, through the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, through the 8th. June 3rd to the 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific. I'll be coming on live and giving folks a 30-minute class, teaching each of these more deeply and more, so that you can find your best fit strategy. It's an event that Lee's been to and other folks in our world here at Raising Our Resilience. But we really want to help you find your calm in the chaos of parenting. You know, it's like there's an art form to it, but once you get the ball rolling, you start to just become a person who can find their calm. And that's very exciting because stress is incredibly damaging to relationships, to our nervous systems, to our health, etc. Anyway, so 2 of my favorites. All kinds of breathing tools are really helpful. I am such a big advocate of this that I actually created this little infographic. I'll put it up here so you can see it. That just gives you some quick ideas of things that you can do so that you can kind of put your lid back on and regain your composure and your calm. Taking the place of thing that you need to do to take care of yourself. And this can be more of like a just how to cope in the moment. I don't recommend you end here, but it does make a difference. So one of them, for example, is being able to really like release a bigger breath. So we'll just roll through one right now that maybe you haven't heard of before. Here's the infographic. Let's do the big balloon breath. So the big balloon breath is where you fill up, but then you keep filling, then you keep filling, and you make your hands go out and bigger and bigger. And then when you let go of the air, you kind of make that sound, that kind of like air leaking out of a balloon. So if you're with me, just try this right now. Then you can go and share it with one of your children, even if it's super goofy and your child is older, they might appreciate seeing you lighten up and be silly. So let's go for it. So you put your hands kind of in front of your belly, like you're just touching your belly. And then when you breathe in, your hands go out too. So breathe in more, fill up that balloon, keep breathing in more, even more, as much as you can. Fill it all the way up. So it's the biggest balloon ever, and more. And now let it out with us. Notice my hands are moving towards my belly, right? Why this works is it gets you to hold oxygen in against the tissues of your lungs and get your so that the blood that flows through your lungs can oxygenate and then carry oxygen to all your vital organs, which helps you to downregulate. It also slows down your breath with that sound, and it gives something for your mind to focus on. And this is the same for your kids. Other than whatever it is that is upsetting them or stressing you out, just gives you a little bit of a brain break, we like to call it, to kind of reset your nervous system on many levels. So something that simple can make a difference. If you did it, let me know, put it in the chat. Say, like, I tried it and here's how it feels. For me, I get just a little bit buzzy in a good way, like and it can, when you do 3 or 4 of them, it can lead definitely to this feeling of like clear thinking, more alertness, more energy, and you can really like move your body with it too to make it even more energizing. Okay, all right. And the second one that I really like is anything that allows you to tense and release. And it just helps you to identify that, like, a lot of times emotional reactions is because you're holding something and it needs to let go. And so I would just ask you to just take a moment and feel your body right now, just kind of like from head to toe, just kind of scan it like you were like being scanned with a little machine. And where do you feel tension? Immediately my body goes, oh, thank you. My lower back, it's there. I'm like, yep, I feel it. So, and then if you can put a hand on that spot, or you can just sense where it is, and then go ahead and actually add tension and then try to let go of the tension deeply. We'll do it 3 times, 5 seconds. Okay, 5 tense, 5 release, 5 tense, 5 release. Okay, here we go. Tense, 4, 5, and release it. Ooh, really move it if you can. Gently if you need to go gentle, go big if you want to go big, and tense again. 2, 3, 4, 5, and let it go. See if you can do it gently, or if you wanted to really move your body where it's tight. For me, it's at back, so I'm kind of like moving my spine, and do it a 3rd time. Here we go. Tense, 2 more seconds, and release. Whew. And shake it out, release it. Maybe you need to do something to release your voice and your throat. Go, or these little micro practices add up in a day. And what I can tell you is that because it's something like short and easy and kind of punchy, like, memorable, you're more likely to do them. And what it does over time is it helps you to have that flash of awareness that you need something. And then I like to ask after I do one of those, like, is there anything else I need right now? And often I realize, like, oh my gosh, I have to go to the bathroom, or, I'm really thirsty, or gosh, I'm hungry, So tuning in really, really helps. Lee says about the routines. It says it totally helps her to not nag them, and she just refers to it by saying, let's check the chart to see what's next or what needs to get done, which really helps with your 5, 7, and 9-year-old. Thank you, Lee. Yeah. We can really see the picture of like 3 boys, 5, 7, and 9 in your care, and then instead of nagging them, you just bring them over to check the chart. So good. Yeah, well done, love. You can tell I'm proud of my students. And so I would say bringing in more of those micro practices for any time we feel emotionally dysregulated is so helpful. It's why in our immersion, we spend 3 days in an emotional mastery weekend. We do things like build a calm down corner and learn about triggers and how to tame them and so much more. But this is a little start for anybody listening. Okay, now we have a fun question. This one's all about differing parenting styles. This is from, looks like Sarah and Carol both want to know more about this. And what I can say about this is that you really need to get a sense of like where you're coming from, because we often either default to what we grew up with, or we default to the opposite of what we grew up with. And so one thing I can share with you just really briefly is that there's a longer exercise with this, just so you know. So you're not, I'm not trying to shortchange you on the full exercise, but I do want you to know that there's a better, like a longer one available. But basically along two continuums, we can either be incredibly supportive, or we can like high support or low support. So just say support here. And then we can be high or low on demand. Okay. So we're going to say that this to the right would be, oops, this to the right would be high demand. Oh, it's not going to let me delete it. Great. Let's see if I can select it. Do this guy. Yeah. Okay. There we go. So if you're to the right, then this is high demand. If you're to the left, you're low demand, high support, and low support. And most of us can say that, put a little X and say like, wow, my mom was really demanding, but didn't give a whole lot of support, or was very inconsistent. So I'd put my mom here. And my dad was supportive, but had almost no demand. So I'd put my dad probably, and it wasn't consistent support. So like here. Well, where we want to get is where there's a high support and there's high demand. Somewhere in this zone is usually good. But if we grew up with something different, like I did with your mom and dad, like what tends to happen is that you can kind of swing, around. And so what can here, I'll show you, just pick another color, is that I can kind of swing back and forth between these two because they're my default, where I'm like very, but kind of don't have very good boundaries and not really, helping my kid learn lessons about respect and, kind of right conduct and things like that. So not very many consequences or things. And then when that doesn't work, I'll swing all the way over here and like drop a bunch of demands and consequences. All the warmth goes away. And really what we want to do is sort of move in this direction where we're able to blend the two together. Well, what inevitably happens, friends, is that we end up in relationships with people who have different backgrounds. And oftentimes it's part of what attracted us to them. So you might have someone who's all support and low demand. That's where they've kind of landed, or maybe they had two parents like that. So that's all they know. They don't really know how to necessarily bring in the demands. Or maybe you have a parent, you're a partner who had a very low support, or maybe they even had someone who was pretty checked out and not giving much support or demands. They also don't know how to kind of bring things, bring things into this space here where you're actually blending the two together. And so what I would say first and foremost is do a little investigating. I know I went deep with Lee and Sergio. Sergio is Lee's partner, in a VIP day that they won in one of our contests. Remember that, Lee? Yeah, where we really took a look at this and also talk about like what do we really want to create in the as an alternative to like sort of how we were raised. And we really kind of weave together some pieces for you that I know you continue to really ponder and reference. So I would just start with being like kind of open and honest and have some dialogue around like how you were raised and with this idea of support and demand, and look at each of your parents. And then maybe just do a little reflection on like what your best parenting moments and your worst parenting moments, and why maybe your worst parenting moments look really different from each other based on where you come from. So that's just a little suggestion. And that's something that I like to guide folks through when they raise this question within my practice with my clients, because it's so powerful. I've definitely had parents start to repair their relationship once they realize like where these tendencies were coming from. Otherwise, it can just feel like we're not a good match as parents, which is not necessarily the case, because sometimes what's really going on is that you both have strengths to bring to the table, and you just haven't figured out a way to sort of blend them together into something that feels more like on the same page and ready. The other thing I would say about this is being able to talk through what your limits are and why you have them is an incredibly important exercise. It's something I have my clients do twice a year to make sure that they're and more often as things come up. Because if you don't know how you're going to address out of bounds behaviors, that's where a lot of the conflicts come in. So making an inventory of like, what are our limits? Why do we have them? what's like the absolutely not okay version, what's the kind of okay for now version, and what's the like behavior we actually want to see from our kids. Rolling through that exercise can be incredibly helpful. So that's just another suggestion. Now I have another question from Nancy Nancy and Ismene. You both have unique enough names, we can forgo the last names. About managing your child's big emotional outbursts. And I just wanted to bring attention to that. There are some folks here who asked a question that was really similar to an earlier question, but I don't want you to be left out. So I just want to go ahead and tag you in this part too, but I want to direct you towards, maybe go back actually to the, like, watch it from the beginning so that you can have a chance to benefit from what we talked about earlier. And so you'll that's going to be coming up in the comments here too. So, just a few folks being tagged. All right, so yes, how do we handle big emotions? This is like the theme of the whole series, isn't it? That we've been talking about. So I would also say, hey, go check out what we've been talking about, because there's a lot here. There's a lot there. Things like how to identify and address triggers, etc. Yeah. So please be sure to check that out. All right. But what I can say in the moment is you've got to know how far their lid is off. And what do I mean by that? So kids do have, and all humans have, levels of dysregulation, right? There's like mild dysregulation, there's like quite a bit of dysregulation, there's you know, kind of like somewhere not quite all the way blown out, and then there's like just total like beast mode, lids off, like feral, kind of totally into the reptilian brain, a lot of dysregulation. So what we have to do though is be able to, as best as our ability, detect how far is their lid off before we decide on how we're going to support the child. Because I tell you that when a kid has their lid half to all the way off, meaning their brain activity is no longer integrated, and it's sort of misfiring in a sense, where the priority is going to be the brainstem and the limbic system, where all the emotions run the show, like the amygdala and the alarm center. So it's like fear, kick, fear, run, fear, you know, like that, and then they screaming, right? If any of those symptoms show up, you are not dealing with a logical person anymore. And if you are going to use logic, it has to be very concrete and related to getting calmer and helping them through the emotion. So one thing you can do is you can lightly emotion coach them while you take some action. So you're like, oh, sweetie, being in this situation is way too upsetting. Let's move to the other room and talk. Or let me help you in the other room. And you move them out of the situation. That could be one way. Get away from the trigger. Do a tap out with another adult or another caregiver. If you are the trigger, let someone else take over for a little while. Those are some of the act swiftly things you can do. In terms of emotion coaching, one of the most important things you can do is just like, don't pick a fight with the feeling. Like, you will lose. I would say, don't pick a fight with a feeling. You're bound to lose. So in other words, if they're sad, be like, yeah, that makes sense that you're sad. You just lost this or that, right? Or if they're scared, and be like, yeah, sometimes it can be a little creepy or scary when this thing happens. Like, or that really surprised you and startled you. Of course, you feel a little bit freaked out. If they're mad, think of just one general way that makes sense. Like, oh, you know, it can be really hard to not get what you want. I realize that, you know, it's really not really sure where you have your power yet, kid. So a combination of that and acting swiftly can really help in the moment, but there's so much more to say. So please go ahead and peruse our, you know, the trainings that are up right now in the group. All the mindset moments of the last maybe 5 weeks have been on this topic. So you'll get a lot out of those. Those are just a few tips. Helpful? Okay, great. All right, next topic here. We've got a question from Rebecca Heaton. Yeah. Let's see if I can tag you, dear. Nope, it didn't come up. So we'll just have to see if you can find it later. So Rebecca's question is, how can I help my child manage, or sorry, better enjoy their time at home without their friends? Well, I know it's tough, right? Because they've just been so isolated in varying degrees at varying times and varying locations, but can just be really tough. So first of all, I'm sorry, and I feel for your child and for everybody here who can relate to this, because it's not easy. It's not easy to be a young person in a pandemic. It's just true. And Rebecca, I think you have just a little guy, right? Like a 1-year-old. So, I mean, so good news, bad news is that kids can oftentimes still get something out of interacting through the video platform, right? So through like seeing faces for 1-year-old, it can actually still have some significant impact. And I wonder about socializing like in ways where they can still see kids, but either not necessarily making contact with them, and kind of being creative about that, like whether they're at the same park as other kids, but maybe they're not like touching the same equipment. You know, he or she needs to be in your arms, and then your child can still like watch children play, because there's a lot they can get out of that as well. Another thing, and I know you've already probably thought about this, but I'm going to make a plug for it, is that, you know, over the time of the pandemic, when it was possible, I know it's not possible for everybody, but when it was possible, it really did make a difference to pod up with at least one other family with a child similar in age. Just one, at least just one, so that they could get that in-person tactile experience with just one other set of adults and, you know, possibly, and some children as well. So do consider kind of refresh your list. And what I would say that people had the most success with was just kind of being a little bit brave around asking. Because a lot of times we get shy and we're like, well, I don't really want to out myself as someone who is so risk averse, you know. But what I can tell you from the other side, from having many of my clients and also friends and family and folks in this Facebook and, you know, newsletter community, Raising Our Resilience community, is that the people who reached out kind of tirelessly till they found the right match, we're so glad that they did. So I hope that's helpful, Rebecca. Let us know what you think. Hopefully we'll be able to tag you soon so you can find a spot in the recording. Okay. I would like to just maybe share that, let's see, Bronwyn Bell also has a similar question. So Bronwyn, I know maybe your child is your niece might be a little bit older, but it's like very similar question to Rebecca's. So we'll just throw that in there as well. And hers is like, how can she help her niece who tends to be more, tends to be kind of socially isolated? So please just check out what I just shared. Let's see. All right. Yes. All right. Let me see if there's anything else related. Okay, so now we've got some that are more related to limits. This is going to be good. And then Mel, I'm going to do you first because you also had an emotion question, and I would encourage you, like I just did to Bronwyn, to like have a listen to the beginning, you know, to the earlier part, because there's quite a bit of information about managing your own triggers around kids and their emotions. Let's do this one. So kids fighting, siblings fights. I have a lot of clients with kids ages 4 and 7 right now, and 3 and 6, and like just in that 2 or 3 year age range, but still under 8. So this is definitely something that other folks are asking about, Mel. You're not on your own with this. And I would say, first of all, when siblings spend a lot of time together, they're going to naturally find each other irritating or find things that the other person is doing that are annoying to them. Like that's not something you can necessarily fully avoid. But what you can do is be a bit proactive and come up with a family plan for how long you let them try to work it out before you ask them to take a break and separate, for example. You can introduce like problem solving suggestions. I do that with my clients twice a year. We go over the problem solving suggestions and that kids can adopt, especially, you know, and lower elementary, like 6, 7, 8-year-olds are especially good at adopting problem solving strategies. So I would just be a little more instructive, especially with your 7-year-old, around like naming that this is happening, like trying to identify some of the core conflicts that are happening and brainstorming some solutions when it's not already going on. And one of the key tools in making that successful is introducing something called the I statement, which I like to think of even more of as a impact statement, because you're letting the person know how you're impacted by their actions oftentimes. So you could say like, you know, I feel frustrated when you don't give me a turn because you've been using it all day and you know that I like to use it too, you know, and that's a way to start a conversation instead of, hey, give me that, grabbing it, you know, or however the flavor of the conflicts tend to go. So I statements, I feel some, you know, an emotion. So I feel blank when you or the situation blank because blank. And usually what follows pretty naturally after that is some kind of ask. And it's like, so I'd really like you to give me a turn now, or I'd really like us to come up with a win-win solution, or I'd really like to get some help with this. Maybe mom can help us, right? It kind of flows naturally into like, let's fix this problem together. Or it could also invite the other person to say, well, I'm also frustrated because you used it all day yesterday and didn't give me a turn. And then it's like, oh, there's a little bit more nuance here, you know? So I think that's a good one. And let me know what you like about that if you're listening and you think that something you might want to try at home, Mel and anyone else who has siblings at home. And then this rolls into a bigger question about respect. And it kind of does tie into some things that we've covered. This is Steph, Atia, and Adriana, who I'm going to try and tag you here so that you are alerted. But what the question is, how do I create an environment of listening and respect with my family? Yeah, such a good question, right? And I know that it's sort of like a very much more general question. But what I would say is like, you've got to have a game plan around how you're going to set limits, how you're going to address it when kids and any family member goes outside of those limits. And if you don't have a lot of practice with this, like perhaps you're not an educator, so you don't really kind of know what like the common list of things is, or this is your first time parenting, or it's just like not quite in your wheelhouse because it's just like something you don't really necessarily pay attention to otherwise, how understandable that this might be tricky, right? And so like I was recommending earlier, like taking the time to actually talk through, and I would do it, here's another tip on that, I would do it where you just talk through scenarios. Like I had a family start with just table etiquette, like what's okay and not okay at the table, like what behavior are we encouraging, what's okay sometimes, and what's not okay, right? So saying really rude things about the food for a 7-year-old and going, ew, is like, was in their red zone. They were like, absolutely not. But saying, no, thank you, I don't care for that, was in the green zone, like yes, green light on that. And then occasionally, if she can't help it and just spits out the food, that's sort of in the like in between zone, the yellow zone, because she couldn't help it. But as long as she says, you know, something to acknowledge, like, excuse me, sorry about that, or something. Just that one little piece of it, like just getting to talk it through, help them, because they were kind of looking at each other like, who's going to address this? Are we addressing this? And it just put a lot of tension into this. And, you know, of course, they both wanted the same thing, was like having it, you know, having it work out, like having this lesson learned about being respectful. So taking the time to sit down and chart it out, and I would just say, you know, like just write it out and take some notes and talk it out and pick one thing to start with can be a really great way to get started. Okay. All right. And I'm gonna then address Tamara's question, who has similar question about limits, but she also wants to ask about children with different needs. And I think that's an important always to bring in. First of all, Tamara, I do my best to only make suggestions that work with most children. But then, of course, we always know that every individual has different levels of need, depending on what their you know, developmental needs are. So I would say moderate range. Everything I've shared is totally appropriate. And you may need to do things like be more patient with how many times you repeat yourself, or you may need to check for their comprehension or understanding when making a request, like more often, and really get that confirmation before you expect a child to follow through on a request or an expectation. Another thing that's really made a difference is that for kids with attentional or frontal, executive functioning challenges, like realizing that auditory can just be so abstract. And so you might want to adjust things like say things with less words, show more than you tell, and do as much as you can to create visual cues. And also embrace the fact, if it's attentional challenges, embrace the fact that there are ebbs and flows in attention, and it's often not a child's choice how well they can attend or focus that day. That can make a really big difference. And then I would say, like, once you know for sure that your child is, the child does know what the limits are, you've shown them, they've shown comprehension back to you, they can demonstrate that they know it, then you can hold them to it with the caveat of, like, there might need to be a little flexibility based on what kind of day or moment they're having, like their capacity. And so just like the lid detecting, I think with any children, all children, but especially with children with developmental or other challenges who are not necessarily neurotypical, you've really got to start attuning to the child's like range of capacity and figure out, is this a high capacity, a mid capacity, or low capacity moment or day, and really try to tend to the variables that will help to increase their capacity, and putting even more attention there than like limits and consequences. Even though structure is really good and really important, you're really missing a piece if you don't sort of take care of those precursors, preconditions. And kids with developmental challenges or differences are even more sensitive to things like hunger and like physical comfort and tiredness and all kinds of things. So even their diet, right? So it can take some time. So you have to bring in a lot of space for grace and a lot of compassion for everybody involved. And so I would also say consult a coach or expert to be your thought partner. Make sure you've got some company, maybe even a group of peers, so that you can hear, like, I know for some folks in my community, for example, the fact that one of my children has been diagnosed with ADHD, my stepchildren, and we had to navigate all of that time of him being in school age, middle school, high school, especially. Just being able to talk to someone like myself, who is a viable thought partner, can really help you organize around like what to focus on next. So Tamara, I mean, would love to chat with you and see what I can do to support you. So I've got two questions about organization and being around either children all the time or having busy schedules. So this seems like a good one to put together. Let me just put it into the comments here so I can tag folks. Here we go. Hopefully that pops it in. Yep, okay. So this is from, I think it's Siggy and Miriam. So here, how can we create more cooperation from our children as we juggle our busy schedules? Oh, and cooperation, that's, yeah, kind of shifting into the motivation topic, which we're gonna kind of save for last. And then Miriam asks, what ideas do you have for being at home all the time with my children around organization and activities? Good question, Miriam. Yeah, I know there's a lot of folks who are in the same boat where they're just like, my gosh, I'm home with my kids a lot. You know, some places are experiencing surges, or just like the weather, you know, has not been allowing. There's all these different factors, right? Maybe you have someone immunocompromised in your family and you're just trying to figure it out. So I feel for you, Miriam, and Sage, being busy. I think we can all relate to being busy. So let's do the structure around being home all the time. Kids thrive with structure that reflects their biorhythms. So, you know, I can't tell you the difference it would make when I would go in as a consultant in a preschool environment or even an elementary, and we'd overhaul their schedule so that it matched earlier snack and earlier lunch and earlier afternoon snack and earlier rest time, just shifting it up was oftentimes a theme. And also helping kids to successfully take advantage of those times, like playing an audiobook at lunch so they eat more, and having a rule that they need to sit and be at the tables for the first 15 minutes before, or 20, before they could get up. Really encourage them to like eat enough, because like a third of the kids would just take a bite and go play, as an example. So I would want you to be really overhaul, like just looking at the biorhythms of the day. So when they wake up, when they eat, when they potty, when they drink water, and when they rest, and when they go to bed, and really lock that into a pretty tight rhythm. The younger the kid, the more important. Okay. That in itself will help you to start organizing your structure. The other thing is that anything that has to do with like a lot of cognitive activity, I would prioritize the morning or the 1 hour after playtime, like whatever kind of midday playtime. Anything else, it's going to be a little rough to try to get them to focus, unless you start to see their capacity really blossom, and you can adjust. And then the other thing is like that we all know in the Montessori world, because this is what we do, is to absolutely change things up. So I would say about maybe 50 to 60% of the things in the room stay the same, but 30 to 40, like 40 to 50% of the stuff would actually rotate out. And there's such a big movement to decluttering right now that I think, like, obviously decluttering is also helpful, but part of decluttering could be put half of the stuff away and then rotate it out. So you don't if you take something out, you put something away first. If you're stuck in one environment, it's important to have that novelty. And I would also, when I take it out, like kind of fall in love with it all over again yourself, and like show some interest and see if you can kind of rub them into being like, wow, this is cool and I'm interested too. Kind of acquainting them to a board game or a manipulative or a set of books, or some kind of even like dust off an old video game. Like I have someone in my community is doing with her teenager. They're playing like old Mario games and they're having a great time. So those are some tips to help kind of break up the monotony for Miriam and those who are in a similar situation. And as we're juggling our busy schedules, the main thing I want to tell you about that, Siggy, is it takes time to make time. In other words, if you invest some time, you can get a whole lot of time back. And that I would do it in several ways. Getting clear about the limits so that you and any other caregivers and your children kind of know what the expectations are. Second one is revamping your routine so they follow the biorhythms, but also like getting kids on board and more cooperative with them by involving them, like I was showing the chart at the very beginning. Those are two. And then the third would be getting to know what motivates your kid. And this is something I spend 3 days on with my clients called the Motivation Mastery Weekend. I usually give webinars on it in January to kind of kick us off for the year. There's probably some resources sprinkled in the group too about motivation tools and strategies. It's an area that I spent quite a bit of time researching, over 100 studies, and did my own study and everything. So this is a big topic, but I would say when you're busy, oftentimes what's missing is competence, like clear understanding of what and clear expectations. So clear understanding of what's expected, and clear, like making sure your kids actually sort of have the training they need to be successful. So I would call it like taking time out for training is actually going to save you time in the long run. It'll build your child's independence and sense of empowerment, and really give them an opportunity to learn what motivates themselves, like how to motivate themselves as well. So Siggy, I hope that's helpful. And I also know there's another motivation question from Pooja, Angie, and Lucy, who all have teenagers and want to have more motivation. And then Nan and Denise also have, looks like, younger kids who they want to get to clean up their toys and eat their vegetables. Be our final questions for today. See, got such a great group of people, can't you tell? Such good questions. So let's do the younger crowd first, because we're kind of rolling out of some of the younger ideas. So getting your kids to clean up their toys. Number one, build it into the routine. Like have it be a part, like almost its own event that happens. It's not optional. It's really important. It's like the thing that happens before you move on to the next thing. If you establish it as something that's just going to happen, over time, kids will just do it automatically without a lot of fuss. I've found that to be true time and time again. So you might want to consider that when it comes to the vegetables. And then when it comes to the, when it comes to to the cleanup, when it comes to the vegetables, you're going to want to do things like really tune into the fact that like a lot of vegetables are bitter and kids have a very sensitive palate. And so it's actually, they're like physiologically like going to have a reaction to that bitterness. And sometimes that's the barrier to them getting to a place where they will willingly eat them and enjoy them. And so one thought is that even you and I can acknowledge, like, salad is better with dressing and a little sweet and salt. So all the flavors, if you bring them in and you coat the vegetable with, like, they are more palatable to the kids. The other thing you can do is you can actually blend them into other things like smoothies that just have a more powerful flavor, like sweet or salty or sour, that will overpower that bitterness. And the last thing you should do is actually, like, check out food sensitivities, because sometimes kids are having a really intelligent reaction to a stimulus that's not good for them. And it is possible that they need to stay away from that and their instincts are correct. The other thing you can do is get their minds off of the event if it's already a trigger just to see the vegetable. And like I was saying about an audiobook during a meal, or that's why the classic fly an airplane, because it's like fun and you're just like, boop, it's in, can be really helpful. But maybe taking a break from like putting too much focus on it. And then the very last one, there's lots of tips, would be that you only require that they try it. And you're not saying eat your vegetables, you're saying like, I just need you to try it, take a bite. And we've actually been able to introduce to the bonus 7-year-old in my household, like maybe 6 or 8 different foods in the last, whatever year or so, of just getting her to just try it and really ask her, like, does your tongue like it? Does your tummy like it? Like she all of a sudden is like wild about mangoes when before she would side-eye them. Now for your teenagers, Angie, Lucia, and Pooja, what I can say is that you have to get into their world. Like you can't come at teenagers in terms of motivation with an agenda and a plan and a list of things for them to do. Like you got to get into their world first, and then you need to show some understanding of what's on their plate already, or like what their interests are or what they'd rather be doing. And then you can start to share your thoughts and feelings and then start to come up with a solution. So it might sound something like, hey, sweetie, it seems like you're really busy after school these days. What's been going on? And they share with you and you're like, oh, wow. Yeah, that does sound like a full plate. And that's a little different from last week, huh? And then just, hear them out and saying like, yeah, it sounds like you've got kind of some demands going on here. And just get into a conversation where they're sharing what's going on with them. And then you have all this information and you've connected with your child, and that might be all that you actually end up needing, because now you have a new perspective on why they're not helping out this week or whatever. Or you want the conversation to progress. So you say something like, so it sounds like you feel really busy these days, and my guess is that's part of why it's been hard to get to your chores. Is that right? Yeah, Mom, it's really hard, right? Like, yeah, gotcha. All right. Well, I do need to share with you that it has been leaving, let's say it's a 2-parent heterosexual household. It's like it's been leaving your father and I in the state of like having to do everything though. And that doesn't seem quite fair either. Would you be open to talking this through a little bit more? It's so respectful that like sometimes when we soften and get respectful, like the teens and tweens will meet us there, but not until we've acknowledged what they're going through and we get into their world and show that we get it. Like we actually get it. Because if a teen or tween thinks we don't get it, communication shuts down. So take the time to really get it. Like, what is it that they're so focused on? Even if you don't agree, but just see if you can wrap your head around it and find one thing that makes sense about it. Like, oh yeah, it can be hard after a whole day of activity outside of the house to come home and then have more work to do. I totally get that. Sometimes all I want is to just relax and take a break when I get home, right? You know, but that doesn't mean you then let it go and be like, you never have to do chores ever, you know? But then you can say, well, given that, like, how can we work this out so that these chores do get done in a timely way? Well, and then maybe that's a point where you kind of like negotiate some ideas. So like, you know, brainstorm some ideas like, well, how about if for the first hour when I get home, it's my chill time, and in exchange, I will go do my chores without any complaint. Great, let's try that next. And then you try it for like a week, come back and say, how did that go? And kind of start all over again. In the process, having moved a bit forward. Yeah. Okay. All right, y'all, that is an Ask Me Anything. I believe I got to everybody's question. Let me double check. I want to make sure I don't leave anybody out. I left a couple minutes. Oh, ooh, I missed one. Yes. Avery. Oh, right. And that's why, because it's pretty much similar to what we've been talking about. So Avery, all of the above. I think that's what I saved yours for last. I skipped over it to come back to it because I was like, oh yeah. What do I do when my child refuses to do something? Yeah, all of the above. So get them on board with their routines, get clear on what your limits are and why they exist, give them tools to manage their emotions, take the time to get into their world and see what's going on. Like pretty much everything. So listen to the whole thing because it's not a flip of a switch. And that's why one of the titles of my, you know, my trainings that I offer usually in January to the public are like 5 kind and clever ways to motivate children, but it's not sort of how you can motivate your children every time because it's really like a whole relationship that you're building of respect and mutuality. And you can do that by having a more sort of empowering and collaborative approach to things like how you run your everyday and get really clear about what your limits are, expectations, like I said. So I would start there, and in the moment, I would just bring it to their attention that something's happening. And if an emotion comes up, I'd help them kind of cope with the emotion, but kind of stand my ground calmly and lovingly. And then later on, I would probably review what happened and say, well, since this is the expectation, like how can we move forward in a more positive way? And what could my role be to support you in that? Okay, Avery. So hopefully that's got you heading in the right direction. All right, everybody. Until next time, we'll be back next week. We're going to have another Monday Mindset Moment, which is a shorter form, usually 5 to 15 minutes. And I'm going to be actually talking about supporting kids in the moment with their big emotions, with a couple of steps of emotion coaching to get you started. So we'll see you then. Lots of love to you all.